Hello, kia ora, and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with artists from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Jakic. Hello there. Thank you very much for joining me on the Creative Matters podcast. This is episode 145, and I'm speaking with Sue Gardiner and Karen Gardiner from the Chartwell Trust. Creative visual thinking is fundamental to us all as human beings, as we strive to understand our sense of self and the world. Chartwell seeks to deepen understanding about the importance of art and creative thinking for our future and our well-being. The Chartwell Trust was set up in the early 1970s by Robert Gardiner, then a Hamilton businessman and accountant, as a charitable trust to realise Chartwell's vision for wider access to and deeper understanding of creative visual thinking. The Chartwell Collection was established in 1974 as a privately managed public collection, a new model for its time in New Zealand. From the beginning, all acquisitions went immediately into public gallery care and use. In this really interesting episode, I speak to two of the Chartwell Trust directors, Rob Gardiner's daughters, Sue and Karen Gardiner, as they celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Chartwell Trust's involvement with and support of the visual arts in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Karen and Sue share some lovely stories about their early days with their parents, Rob and Ev, and the man that is Rob Gardiner. We talk about the long 50-year history of Chartwell, how and why Rob started the Chartwell Collection, why the collection eventually came up to Auckland from the Waikato to the Auckland Art Gallery, Toi o Tamaki, in 1997, and why contemporary art makes up the collection, and also how acquisitions are chosen. Chartwell's activities and projects are divided into 4 key domains: being, seeing, making, and thinking. Karen talks about one of the Chartwell outreach projects named Squiggler, which is a cross-curricular tool that helps develop creative thinking through the power of mark making. Sue takes us through ideas around asking questions in art, how we respond to contemporary art, the effects of viewing art, slow looking, and Chartwell's hopes for the next 50 years. She shares the 50th anniversary program with us, which is running from March 2024 to March 2025. This is a really wonderful conversation which recounts an important part of Aotearoa New Zealand's social and visual art history and celebrates the value of art and the creative process for everyone. Enjoy. Kia ora, Sue Gardiner and Karen Gardiner from the Chartwell Trust.
Good morning, Mandy. Lovely to be here.
Kia ora, Mandy. Thanks for having us.
It is so lovely to have you both here, two amazing, formidable sisters. And we've just had a lovely chat upstairs. And it's really nice to have you here. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. So I have asked you two to come today to talk about the Chartwell Trust, to celebrate your 50th birthday. 50 years ago, the Chartwell Trust was developed, and also for us just to learn a little bit more about what you do and why you do it, and for us to understand really the ideas behind this incredible collection of works. So, Sue, can we start with you? Could you please just tell us a little bit about your childhood and what it was like growing up with your parents, Rob Gardiner and, is it Ev?
Yeah, Ev Gardiner.
Ev Gardiner. And then how Rob got started with the Chartwell Trust.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Mandy, by the way. Yeah, 50 years of supporting the visual arts is something to really be celebrated. And Karen and I are in a wonderful position to still share this history with Rob, our father. And Rob and Ev with us when we were little kids. They moved to Hamilton in 1962. And because they were so interested in art, they joined the Waikato Society of Arts. So in a way, Chartwell's history comes out of another incredible history, which is of art societies around New Zealand. They were artists, which both our mum Ev and Rob both had a long life as art makers. They joined the Waikato Society of Arts, and so they joined a great group of very proactive people who really wanted for a long time to build the visual arts scene in the Waikato. And so when Rob became the president of the Waikato Society of Arts, he was also working as an accountant, so he had great knowledge about financial things, but he also had great knowledge about charitable trusts and taxes and so on. And he was very motivated to share that knowledge with artists. What really happened with the Waikato Society of Arts is that they realised that Hamilton was really growing. You know, it was when Waikato University was established, also Wintec was established reasonably soonish around that, and at the Teachers College in Hamilton was a whole generation of really influential, who to become influential visual arts educators for Maori artists and Maori art around New Zealand. So this was all kind of happening in Hamilton. But what they didn't have was a public art gallery. And Rob looked at what was happening in New Plymouth with the Govert Brewster Gallery, which opened in 1970. And he invited John Maynard, who was the first director of the Govert Brewster, to come to Hamilton to help him and the WSA people talk to the Hamilton Council, talk to the mayor. John Maynard presented a report about the value of a public art gallery for a city. And that's really how things happened. Things were slow, but Rob realised that it would help the cause if he was able to establish that a public art gallery would have a contemporary art collection. He started this idea because he felt that reinforced their advocacy for a gallery. And so he came up with this model to set up a charitable trust, which happened in the early 70s. And the goal of the trust would be to generate income that could develop a contemporary art collection. So the first acquisitions for that collection were made in 1974. And it was a collection that was really quite a radical model. It wasn't a family trust. It was set up as a charitable trust. It wasn't a private collection where the works acquired went into your home and eventually were given in some future time to a public art gallery. The goal was the very first acquisition went straight into the care of the public art gallery. And in that instance, 1974, the very first acquisition was a Bill Sutton work. Prior to the new building and the new Waikato Museum of Art and History opening in 1987, they were using leased premises, a small gallery, and that's where the first acquisitions went. And that was really what started the whole ball rolling.
Which is incredible, isn't it? And for Rob to come up with such a sort of original model is really interesting. What was it that was really driving him to create this collection, do you think, at the beginning?
Yeah, well, you're right about it being a unique way of thinking for him. He's always been an innovative thinker, a very original thinker. And if he sort of set his mind to take on or to sort of tackle a problem, he would come up with multiple solutions, test them all out, and then eventually one would kind of bubble to the surface and keep going. Because before the history of the collection, there was this history of him coming up with lots of other ideas, one of which was to fundraise for this new gallery. And one of the ideas was called Computer Pal, and it was using the punch card data collection system. Used it at the office where he was, of course, a partner in this chartered accountancy firm. And this was the idea of a matchmaking program. He was probably the first person in New Zealand to start a matchmaking campaign where they wrote the questions. People could send in $2, fill out a form about whether they were looking for someone tall or short or athletic.
That was the first of Tinder.
Yes. He married off our next door neighbour, married our babysitter.
Was he making as you were growing up?
He sure was.
And by the way, we're talking to Karen now.
So from a very young age, he was drawing, he was carving, he was painting, he was building sand sculptures on the beach. He was doing all sorts of things. And we remember when we were young that both Mum and Dad were doing their own artwork. They both had their own studios, and we used to have friends who would come around, be absolutely amazed at what was happening in our house as far as studios and artwork and things were going. And we always had the opportunity to go into their studio and try out new things. And then our children, as we had our children, they were always welcomed into the studio spaces and doing collaborative works together. And so it was a very
artistic
creative environment to be brought up in.
And that must have changed, or it's made what the people that you are today. You're both so connected to the visual arts, and you're also starting to make now, Karen.
Yes, we've always dabbled in various making things along the way. But yes, I've started making my own clay objects, which I'm enjoying. But another thing we used to do when Sue and I were young, as all the Chartwell Trust was happening and Waikato Society of Arts was happening in Hamilton, was they would have regular open artists' days on the left bank of the river, Waikato River. And so Sue and I were always involved helping out on those days and helping Mum in the pottery stall, and Dad would be drawing. He did a lot of, people would pay $2 or whatever it was in those days for a hand-drawn portrait. So he'd have queues of people lined up for his portraits.
Wow. And at age 91, which Rob is now, he is still making works, isn't he?
He's still going strong. He's incredible. Every day he's churning out
And what kind of work is he making
Incredible
now?
Work.
Well, he's very connected to thinking about his senses. So, for example, if he experiences something in his day, he'll interpret that through the kind of feeling in his body and his memory and in the marks and materials that he makes. So he takes a very long-term approach to the idea of abstraction, the interaction between what's happening in his mind, through his eyes, through his hands. He's a very tactile person, and the materials that he uses. And that all becomes kind of infused within this sort of thinking system, if you like. And he's very responsive to whatever happens during the day. So he's experimental as could be, playful, really invested in the materials, disrupting them, destroying them, and inventing new things all the time. And it's really what sustains his whole life.
Yeah. And that sounds to me a lot like the ideas behind Squiggler, which is another Chartwell project, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So we go to 1982, and the Centre for Contemporary Art in Hamilton was opened. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so from 1974 to 1982, Rob was acquiring works always with the collection of the Waikato Museum in mind. And he worked very closely with the kind of policies that the Waikato Museum had as well. And when in that first round of acquisitions, there was a group of prints, really early Australian prints that entered the collection, because it was printmaking that the Waikato Museum and the Fine Arts Director there, Campbell Smith, was interested in. So that happened for several years, and because they were in temporary premises, Rob's confidence was building. He was starting in the early 80s to buy big paintings, and they ran out of room in this temporary premises. And so one day he got the call to say, you've got to come and take your paintings away. And it was a terrible moment for Rob, because there was never another place to take them away to. That was their home, was the public art gallery, and he didn't have anything else set up. It wasn't that he could take them home and put them in our house at all. So it was a real shock and a kind of a challenge to him. How could he then maintain his commitment to the public art the idea of access that the public would have to an art gallery. And he describes the story that he and Mum walked up and down Victoria Street looking at buildings and trying to figure out what to do. And they saw that the beautiful old Hamilton Art Hotel at the south end of Victoria Street was for sale. In fact, it was pending that it was going to be demolished. They had a look through it. It was a very beautiful building. And so the Chartwell Trust acquired the Hamilton Hotel. They transformed it into the Hamilton Arts Centre, and one of the levels of the building was converted into an art gallery. So by 1982, they'd opened the Hamilton Arts Centre. They opened the gallery, which was called the Centre for Contemporary Art, CFCA. Yeah. They gave the Waikato Society of Arts a gallery as well, who were there for another kind of 14 years or so in that space. And so he developed a whole kind of cultural centre there, and that became the home of the collection. Mm-hmm. He acquired state-of-the-art storage facilities and had to develop now a very active program of exhibitions that happened in the gallery. Then every year there was a major Chartwell Collection new acquisitions exhibition. So people could come off the street, see the latest contemporary art exhibitions, come every year to see what was happening with regards to the Chartwell Collection. And they had a very, very small team. Rob would take a Monday off from his job at the accountancy practice and once a month and meet the artists who would come down and install their exhibitions. When I say come down, a lot of people were coming from Auckland, people were coming from all over New Zealand, from Dunedin and so on, to have exhibitions there. But the key thing was that a lot of people were also coming from Australia. As he reached out to pursue a really strong interest in representing trans-Tasman art practices in the collection. There'd be Australian artists who would come to New Zealand, often for the first time to the country, but instead of going to Auckland or Wellington, they'd go to Hamilton.
Yeah, which is incredible because Hamilton is a small town. I mean, especially in those days, it's regional New Zealand.
Well, you asked me why Rob started the collection. At the heart of what you just said, Mandy, was actually one of the key reasons. Hamilton was a regional centre. It had a long history built as a kind of service town to the farming industry around. And yes, there was a strong core of the arts community, but it wasn't being in Auckland, it wasn't being in Wellington, and there really wasn't much of a history, or a very wide history of collecting contemporary art. There were some very key collectors like Barry Hopkins and a range of others in the Waikato, but it was the access to the latest contemporary art that was what Rob really wanted. But really also at the core of it, we think here's this person who's got an analytical, rational mind, who's brilliant with figures and so on, and then also somebody who is drawn to the aesthetics world, the aesthetics of the visual arts. And it was because he had those two ways of thinking that this whole project developed. Yeah. And so each side of, if you like, of thinking of him in these two seemingly different ways of being in his world, they were actually bringing these two different systems together, and that was the key identifying thing as to why Chartwell has become so strongly based around a philosophy of the kind of the whole human mind, and that's been something that's been really important.
Yeah, you can see that. And he must have just surrounded himself also with other people who had different skills. In showing the work, he just made sure he had the right people to kind of represent the collection in the way that he wanted it to be represented.
Well, yeah, interesting from a kind of a social history development of art collecting in New Zealand. Hamilton at that time, I don't think, had a dealer gallery, and it was very early days in terms of dealer galleries in Auckland and in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. And certainly when he was flying over to Australia, it was at the time when you had to apply to the Reserve Bank to get foreign currency to go and buy art in Australia. He had to apply to go and get the funds. So there wasn't much of a structure that at that stage. I mean, it was fledgling. That so when he opened the Centre for Contemporary Art in 1982, the Auckland Art Gallery had been doing some contemporary art projects, a lot of kind of experimental projects in the late 70s, but other kind of independent contemporary art spaces didn't open until a bit later. So Art Space, for example, opened in 1987, and some major artists run spaces like Test Strip, who were showing experimental work. They really didn't open until the end of the 80s, early 90s. So the Centre for Contemporary Art was a place which wasn't happening much else, and people would travel from Wellington or Auckland to come and see the exhibitions. And so it was a very inspiring place. Yeah. And again, I think it wouldn't be the same if it wasn't in Hamilton. It was in Hamilton because the drive and the need and the recognition that these things had to happen. We could drive up, and Karen and I would sit in the back seat of the Triumph or the Rover, whatever car that Dad had, to go and see the exhibitions in Auckland. But he wanted it to happen in the Waikato.
And how did the community actually respond to that? I mean, having a public gallery, which maybe not many families would be interested in those days, in the regions, and also contemporary art. I mean, it must have been hard for some people to swallow.
Well, I mean, that's right. In a way, that's another major motivating factor for the development of the Chartwell Collection in the first place, was Rob, because he had this life, which I'm not seeing as another life, it's very integrated life, but he had a life where he was engaging, with other people in kind of professional practices. And he was asking himself the question, why is it that the people I work with or that I intersect with, they don't love the thing that I love the most, which is art? How do I reach across this big divide, if you like, and bring them into that world so that they could start to understand themselves as creative people too? I mean, back in the day, you probably couldn't call yourself a creative accountant, but the reality was that it's the kind of thinking that he was able to embrace and to really expand, testing all the time his own thinking, testing everything, didn't he? He tested us over the dining room table with maths questions, which we just used to scream in horror with.
Very stressful.
Yeah, very stressful. But that was his way of thinking. Anyway, he wanted to reach out to the public in Hamilton, bring them in, and the way he thought that they could understand and become really committed to the idea of contemporary art was that if they understood what the creative process was in their own lives, and that was the fundamental thing. And he worked really hard to develop the exhibitions, 130 of them at the CFCA, brought school groups in, brought in teachers, and that was a very strong focus. And he had a lot of success, a lot of people coming and writing reviews. We read this letter by Bernice Murphy, who was the director at the MCA in the year it opened. She'd been to Hamilton, saw the collection, wrote a letter to Rob about how inspiring his commitment to Trans-Tasman art practice was, and it influenced the way she opened up the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. So the reach was great, but also super important to really support the art making and community in Hamilton, and it was successful. They had a lot of good reviews, and things were going well.
And just wanting to make art accessible.
Yeah, the accessibility was a really key thing. But to do that, you can imagine him in his brain thinking, I have to be able to do that, I have to really understand what's happening. What happens when an artist thinks about this work and makes a painting? What does it mean when I look at it? And he just sort of set himself this task, which I believe has been a 91-year-long task, of actually understanding what art is, where does it fit into in a holistic and integrated way to our very sense of human beingness? And that's what's influenced our kind of 4 pillars of the Chartwell project altogether, is this idea about being, human beingness. What does it mean to think holistically, to feel, to respond to the materials of the world, and to understand the creative process? Seeing, what does it mean for us to live in a visual world and to be alert to the visual aspects around us? We can't avoid that. and making, of course, the hands-on materials, the process, the satisfaction, the sense of letting go of other things in our minds to experience fully the making process, and the thinking, the kind of philosophical approach, which we have to always know more about, because that's what's driving the bigger systems in our world.
In 1997, you moved from the Waikato to Auckland Art Gallery in Tamaki Makaurau, and you moved your collection there on long-term loan. Can you tell us how that happened?
Yeah, so if you can picture this world where all these exciting exhibitions are happening at the Centre for Contemporary Art, one of the big things that started to happen was there was a man who was appointed as the director of the new Waikato Museum of Art and History before it opened, but his name was Bruce Robinson, and he was appointed in 1984, and he was working to open this new gallery in 1987. And he and Rob got on like an absolute house on fire. They were the same kinds of people, totally dedicated to contemporary art and to understanding all of that. So it gave Rob great confidence that the Waikato Museum of Art and History, when it opened in 87, there was potential for Chartwell there. He saw that he could move the collection to the Waikato Museum, which happened in 1992, which meant that he had no longer had to kind of try and do all of the registration of a collection, the conservation, the management. There were more loans being requested from the collection, so it made sense for it to be absorbed back into the Waikato Museum in 92. And eventually the Centre for Contemporary Art stopped exhibiting in 1994. So there were a few years where things were really looking up, and they had great plans. But then all of a sudden there was the announcement that Bruce Robinson was being encouraged to leave his job. I'm putting that very politely, which was a huge shock to everybody. And the council instigated a program working towards a merger. They wanted to merge the library and the art gallery, which had already been merged with the museum. And all of a sudden, the focus and future on contemporary art was at risk. Senior staff members who had been so influential in the collection, like Lara Strongman and Linda Tyler, and good people in the visual arts world, were starting to leave, and they felt like things were at risk. So Rob really had, the collection was growing by this stage. I mean, it had an international profile at this stage. There was a work that Rob had bought by Emily Kame Naware, who was a really major Indigenous artist from Australia. The work that represented her at the Venice Biennale came from the Chartwell Collection in Hamilton. Yeah. So, there were it was starting to build a big national and international profile. So things got really messy with this merger, and it was documented in the newspaper. Imagine us, a project we're working on, and every part of your project was published in articles and editorials and opinion pieces in the newspaper every day. And it was a horrendous experience, but he had to move the collection because it was at risk. And it was terrible wrench because their commitment was to Hamilton in the first place, to the Waikato, to all of the art community there. So it was the first time, from what I can understand, maybe the only time, that there were protests about art and the art collection going in the streets of Hamilton. The art community gathered together and wore black armbands, marching outside the mayor's office, throwing empty frames onto the steps of the Hamilton City Council. Really? And Rob was starting conversations with the Auckland Art Gallery. Christopher Johnson was the director that he first engaged with, and soon after, when Christopher left, Chris Saines came on board. So the collection officially relocated. It took a while for it to happen. 1997. Chris Saines, the new director there, said that it was a game changer for the Auckland Art Gallery and a game changer for the Chartwell Collection. And it really has been and continues like that today. The professionalism, to have a professional the group of curators and registrars and conservators, and a director who was dedicated to the visual arts.
So all the acquisitions are stored and managed by Auckland Art Gallery.
That's right. Yes, we have a long-term loan agreement with them that they are the home of the Chartwell Collection. They are dedicated. They do a wonderful job because they're not only embracing us as the Chartwell Trust, but they're managing and helping with the collection. And they are a very important partner for us in the 50th anniversary year. We're co-publishing a book with them, but they've processed 98 loans this year so far in terms of works going out into public galleries around New Zealand as part of our anniversary program. Wow. So yeah, we're very, very fortunate and love being a part of the gallery. We meet all the fantastic staff who are there, of course, the education people,
and you have the birthday cake every year. No, the Christmas cake, isn't it?
The Chartwell cake, it's not just like offering a piece of cake. It's actually, we feel for us, it's kind of representing, because they all feel like part of our family and we feel part of their whānau, the Auckland Art Gallery Toa Tamaki family, and it's about kind of bringing something and sharing some food with them and saying thank you, and it's a special relationship in that respect. And the cake kind of, for us, I think it sort of sums up all of that, the care that they give to us, the care that we give to them, and being able to recognise the value of everybody on the staff. Absolutely. So it's always held at the last staff meeting of the year.
That's right, yeah. And as I worked there, that's, as I said, where we first met. I was an educator at Auckland Art Gallery, and you know, you guys just we had so much respect for you all as people, and also the Chartwell Collection. And it's just such an incredible gift to Aucklanders and New Zealanders, and to the Auckland Art Gallery Toi o Tamaki.
Yeah, it's an enduring partnership in that respect, and so it's an unusual one as well. I mean, we're an independent trust board now, so we have family members involved, Karen and I, of course, and Rob, but it's also important that we have independent trustees who help us to kind of manage the collection and all that we do into the future. And so it's a very special relationship.
Rob obviously really cared about the creative process, not just for the way he thought and worked, but also for other people. And that was a big part of why he was putting this collection together, I presume. And it's amazing now that you've actually been able to create this project, Squiggler, which pretty much encompasses, to me, all of those things that were so important to Rob, or are so important to him and to yourselves. And it just feels like it is educating educators and giving people, you know, from little ones to the elderly, incredible opportunities through that program. So that was developed in 2017. Can you tell us a little bit about Squiggler, Karen?
Right. Well, Squiggler came about, just as you mentioned, through Dad's belief that the visual arts is not only for artists or people visiting galleries, but that should be an outreach for everyone. So people of all ages and of all creeds and race or whatever can be involved in this very special sort of way of making, which is inherent in all of us. So over about 5-6 years, we brainstormed with Dad various ideas of how we could develop a program that we could call our outreach program, the Chartwell Trust. So, and Squiggler came about through that. So we went through the process of coming up with a name and something that was sort of connected, and descriptions that were connected to what was happening with the trust beliefs and objectives. And
that fitted under the making part of.
That's right. Mission. So fitted under the making part, absolutely. So, so Squiggler we've been running now for about 7 years, and we've taken it to schools, art galleries, art fairs, conferences, everybody in their own homes. We've done online workshops. We've now started doing our own workshops in our own space, and yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant program. I have been privileged to actually present it to teachers through Creative Matters with your approval. And I just find it's the most incredible program for bringing creative thinking to people in a really sort of non-judgmental, accessible way. And what I love about it the most for educators and for teachers is that any teacher can pick it up and run with it. And as an educator myself, I just feel like it has such a fantastic place in the classroom program. You know, I am such a believer in it. And, you know, getting children to think creatively and make creative decisions, but also thinking critically is powerful. And I think it's a fantastic starting point to get teachers working with visual arts in their classrooms as well. I just feel like it's got so many amazing advantages.
The nice thing about Squiggler in the classroom or in any situation is that you don't have to have any particular background in the arts to actually be able to teach it or present it or deliver it, because it's something that's inherent in all of us. We just need the opportunity to be able to express that with the way that we encourage people to do that on the page. So we call it our gymnasium for creative visual thinking, and there's lots of ways that we get people to express themselves with inventive and experimental mark making. We tend not to call it art because we know that art has, the actual word has connections that people think, you know, I've got to be an artist or art and
to be able to
get
draw
hung
something.
up, about that, not being able to draw. And so we take away that pressure from people and we just say there's, as you mentioned, it's non-judgmental, no pressure. Just enjoy the act of actually making marks and expressing them through using beautiful materials on the page.
It's very rich. And Sue, this is a program that is steeped in research. Can you tell us the connection with the University of Auckland?
Yes. Oh, well, look, it's important because we knew with Squiggler that if you to be able to advocate for the value of creative visual thinking for everybody, we really had to understand what that creative thinking process was, which meant that we had to know how the human brain worked. And we had an amazing opportunity to meet people at the University of Auckland who were committed also to the knowledge and the value of creative thinking. And for us with Chartwell and Squiggler, it's creative visual thinking, which is what we prioritise. And so an organisation within the university was set up initially called the Creative Thinking Project. We argued for about 2 or 3 years about what the word creative means. What does it mean to be creative? And we had an interdisciplinary and interfaculty board for the Creative Thinking Project. We did a lot of really fantastic things. And as the project grew, we realised that we had the opportunity to become a formalised research centre. And that was based in the Faculty of Education and Social Work, and it is led by Professor Peter O'Connor, and now also co-director with Selena Tusitala-Marsh, and it became CAST, the Centre for Arts and Social Transformation. So its name now, Te Rito Toi Centre for Arts and Social Transformation, is a research centre. It's incredible once you for us to be a part of a research centre at a university. They have incredible reach to government, to other universities, to researchers. And Peter told me a little while ago that it's the fastest growing research centre in the University of Auckland. And so we've learnt a lot. Part of that learning was to learn about the human brain. And there's a wonderful woman who we've met and worked with called Professor Kathy Stinier. She's a neuroscientist. She works with colleagues in the psychology department who are studying where the imagination is located in the brain. And the first thing she told us was that this idea about the left side brain and the right brain was a myth that's been busted maybe in the last kind of 10 or so years. MRI scans show now, they can show that a creative brain is one that is with lots and lots of activated connections all around the brain. And so with Squiggler, it helped us understand how we could activate different ways of thinking, different modes of making, how we could think analytically or kind of through our reasoning brain, but how we could also disrupt that with our sense-based imagination. So Squiggler's really tailored to create that if you can imagine a MRI scan of a brain with lots of interconnecting networks happening all around the brain, and that's what we hope to achieve with Squiggler.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And for people who are interested in having a look, it's squiggler.org. That's the website. It's best to go through the website. And you can actually, sign up and create a gallery and add works that you've done or your family's done or your students have done to that gallery. And then also I love the idea that you can actually share galleries and create groups of galleries that can kind of connect. Yeah, so do you have any other recommendations for people who are interested in discovering more about Squiggler?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, the website is a really good place to start. But particularly with the galleries, it's literally just take a photo of your work, your Squiggler work that you've done, and then it just uploads automatically to your gallery through the once you've signed in to the website. It's free to join, so no problem there. Anybody can do it from anywhere. From home, from school, teachers can make groups. And so the website's working really well for us. We also put out a regular EDM monthly newsletter, which has information about creative visual thinking, what's happening in the Squiggler world, and up-and-coming workshops, exhibitions. We're engaged with conferences. We're at the International Teaching Artists Conference at the university next week, which is exciting, beginning first week of September. And we have an Art Week activation coming up in October. So lots of things happening.
It is incredible that the Chartwell Trust has been sustained for 50 years. You have influenced the visual arts in New Zealand and internationally.
A lot of this 50-year history and our future is all based still around this belief of the public art gallery. I mean, that's actually also what really drives Squiggler. If people can become engaged through workshops and through doing things in their own home. I mean, the research shows that children whose parents take them to public art galleries, they actually do better in all sorts of measures throughout their lives. So a lot of what we do with Squiggler is we also see it as a way to build the audience for the public art gallery. And so once they're in the art gallery, they're much more alert to looking and to perceiving and to understanding things from a creative visual perspective. And it really works. I mean, after we've done workshops, if we go into an exhibition, it's incredible the kind of energized way that you respond to things once you've actually done a bit of making yourself. So the public art gallery has been key in how we engage internationally. Again, a lot of it's through, of course, the active programs of public art galleries. So Chartwell has a very active lending program. So works recently go across to Australia. It hasn't been a huge amount further. We had one of our Martin Creed drawings went to an exhibition at the Tate. But really our focus is in this amazing place that we live and where Chartwell began, Aotearoa, where we're totally committed to this kind of broad and deepening the understanding of the role of culture has for all of us. And we're in a unique position in that we can understand art from a variety of different perspectives and what that means in people's lives. So we're just driven and committed to keep that focus. And, there's always going to be a rolling program of changes and hits that the visual arts takes or education. And we're great supporters of a very active art program within education. Again, research just shows that all of that, you do better if you're also doing art in your lives. So then I think also the public art gallery has been very responsive to having Squiggler in the galleries, for example. So the Auckland Art Fair, we always say to the art fair people, you should have Squiggler at the beginning of the art fair because then people will buy more art. I mean, if that's what you're there for at the art gallery. So we're trying to encourage a kind of familiarity with the visual language and what that can mean in our world.
Yeah, and you do that so well. And really, for New Zealand as such a small country and the funding not being there often for the visual arts, we are very lucky to have a collection like the Chartwell Collection to add to our public gallery. You know, otherwise there might not be the same contemporary art being shown in public spaces.
Well, we're very, very fortunate over the 50th anniversary. There's been some fantastic plans. There are still some exhibitions to come. The Generation X exhibition just opened at the City Gallery Wellington at their pop-up zone at the Te Papa, and there's a wonderful exhibition that's happening at Te Uru Contemporary Art Gallery in Titirangi. Coming up later on, there's quite an expansive exhibition happening at the Suter Gallery in Nelson, and a kind of artist project happening at Te Aotearoa in Queenstown. And the whole anniversary was kicked off at the Waikato Art Museum, which was a really significant moment to re-engage there, and it felt really important to all the people there involved.
Well, that's the roots, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
Lovely. And I've been dying to ask you, how do you choose your acquisitions? What do you take into consideration when you bring on a new acquisition to your collection?
Yeah, I've been studying the kind of way that acquisitions happen throughout, ever since 1974. And if you start off with the whole process, with the whole kind of question about what is art, then it takes you through these huge sweeps of having to approach some new idea every time. And I think it's that idea of noticing how ideas are generated by visual artists and what that relationship between the way that you're thinking and the way that you're making evolves. And really the acquisitions show an evolution of a deepening understanding about the kind of human beingness of making. So tied in with that, it's a very contemporary collection. So it's like a generative process where the collection can be seen like an accumulation of creative acts, and each new provocation in the creative process is something that we're interested in from an acquisition point of view. There's been, on the whole, a very broad-based commitment to abstraction, to the process of making, to materials of the world, and to the creative idea generation process. So there's a big commitment to abstraction, to materials. We love the kind of thinking that developed about 10 years ago around this kind of theory called new materialism, which was very much about engaging with the everyday in a kind of a multiple perspectives of the materials themselves having their own agency. So we're very, very drawn to works that have this kind of active process in their own making. And that means it's a very broad-based way of thinking about art, and always there's questions. There were questions right at the beginning in 1974, and there are questions still now. And we've written a Chartwell book for the 50th anniversary that's going to come out, we're hoping, before Christmas, co-publishing with the Auckland Art Gallery. And I've written a history of the Chartwell Collection as part of that book. And I've structured it around questions, because that's really, Karen and I, our engagement. It's been, we always have to be alert to the next question, always asking what the next one is. And that is what's driven the acquisitions. If you think of each acquisition made as a kind of answer to a question, then they are we see the collection as our creative thought leaders and the artists who have made them. We think about inspirational leaders in all sorts of other aspects of life, but for us, it's the artworks and the artists are our thought leaders that we all need to understand and commit to.
And contemporary art, even though some people find that a little bit more intimidating, is, to me, the most powerful way to really make people think.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, that process of looking is a challenging process. And that's where the thinking behind Squiggler is really important. You understand the power and the beauty and the feeling of making a line on a page. And if you see that work in a exhibition at a public gallery, you have empathy for the making by the artist. If we can approach a work from a sense of positiveness, of empathy, of curiosity for the playfulness of artists in their making process, then we need to let our reasoning, rational, analytical brain go that asks the question, what is it? And how long did it take to make?
Yeah.
these definitive
So
moments
true.
that we try to lock in these questions or these answers. But we believe in open-ended inquiry. We may never know the answers to the questions, but heck, it's a heck of a ride to go along. And I tell you what, it's not stopping. It'll never stop.
Yeah, and that's brilliant.
Yeah, another 50 years of questions. What will be the question we ask in another 50 years? Won't that be amazing? Yeah, but it is a trap that you fall into, thinking that there is one definition for these three little letters, ART. There isn't a one definition. It's actually a definition of ourselves. Every art-making process, you listen to amazing interviews with artists where they talk about the way they be and operate in their world. And the materials, they're in partnership with the materials of the everyday. So all of a sudden, materials that you might use in a collage or in grinding rocks from your own whenua, or collecting water drops from the rain that you experienced in your garden, these are the materials that we have the most deeply embedded relationship with.
Yeah.
And that's what we express when we use those to create a visual experience.
That's part of the story.
And it's so meaningful because it's meaningful to all of us. It's not something that gets squeezed out of a tube. It can be that, but it's these human relationships, which is what we're really interested in. So if we think of our connection bodily with the world, then when we go into the public art gallery and we're looking at a work of art, if we're aware of our own body as we're looking at the work of art, it's a hugely kind of exciting, curious thing. We're aware of how close we might be to a work of art, to the way our memories and feelings are triggered when we're looking at colour or the materials or the scale. What does it mean to us and our own bodies? And Rob's written about this on the Chartwell website, where he's, again, taking his process of asking questions as a way of finding his way through something unfamiliar. He's described the process about what we can do to just let this process wash into our own bodies and out again. And so he talks about letting go. Now, research has shown that most people stop for about 3 seconds in front of an artwork and then move on. So what he wants to do is slow looking, really. Look at the work of art right now. Be aware that your brain is asking all these questions that you want the answers to. When did this person make this work? What's the title of it? How long did it take to be made? Those kind of questions. And then eventually your brain gives up. And it's like telling you, I'm bored with this now, so I'm going to move on because you're not giving me the answers that I need. But if we stay in that moment and then let a kind of slowness take over and a kind of quietening of your questioning brain, actually, and then start noticing things, feeling things, remembering things, and then having this kind of sense of some kind of realization about what you're curious about, and sitting with that for a while. So it's actually part of our anniversary year. We're running this project called the Chartwell Chair because Rob always wants us to be slow looking. Karen and I used to be taken into the centre of a room in a gallery and told to look around and look at everything and then really think about it, one particular work, and say why we were drawn to it. And we weren't allowed to use words like I like it, I love it, or it's beautiful. We had to really come up with things, didn't we? And now he said, when you go to a concert, you sit down and then you clap at the end. When you go to a film, you sit down, and if you're at a film festival, you clap at the end. If you go to a dance performance, you sit down and you clap at the end. So why can't you sit down in a visual art gallery and clap the artwork? So that's led to this project called the Chartwell Chair. Anyone can do it. You can do it in your own home. You can do it in an art gallery. You can do it at work. You can do it in the lunchroom. Put a chair in front of an artwork and encourage people to sit down and look at it.
I love that. That is brilliant. You know, what you have created as a family is awe-inspiring, and it has changed the way visual arts happens in New Zealand. I mean, You are legends. You are living legends. What are you thinking about doing in the future with the Chartwell Trust?
What we're working on at the moment with our wonderful group of independent trustees is thinking about what that future will be like. And I think with every era of art making, there are changes. I haven't even got my head around AI or any of these new things. But we have a great faith in artists to think through the changing world. And what we hope to continue to represent is to be able to keep the focus on the artists and the value that they have for all of us, the impact that they have on the culture. And so for us, it's just going to be another 50 years of following the thinking and making of artists. And that will naturally change over the next 50 years. You think about the last 50 years, there's been huge changes in the whole understanding of the visual arts, and that will continue. But there's one thing that we'll never waver on, is the value of visual arts in education for all of the next generations to come. And that will go through a process of erosion and then redevelopment and so on, and that will be a cycle that happens. But people have to be prepared to be able to stand up for the value of culture and for all of us, and that's really our future.
Well said. So people can go onto your website, chartwell.org.nz, for more information, and it is really a fantastic website where you're showing a lot of the history in there, and then your collection is all there, and then all the names of all the artists who are part of your collection are all listed. So that in itself is an incredible sort of resource. I'm very privileged and honoured that you've come to my little studio in Muriwai, you two, and I feel very aligned with your philosophies and have so much admiration for what you're doing and what you've achieved. So thank you very much for being on the Creative Matters podcast.
Thank you, Mandy. It's been a pleasure to be invited. We're really enjoying being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandy, and to everyone out there, start making today.
Perfect way to finish.